Well, one organisation that might not be in the Treasurer's good books right now is the Productivity Commission. The government's key advisor on productivity this week again questioned the Future Made in Australia policy that's budgeted to spend $22.7 billion supporting key industries in the next decade. Now, you've just heard the Treasurer defending that expenditure, but the Deputy Chair of the Productivity Commission, Alex Robson, this week said the policy could affect Australians' future standard of living. He said a $100 subsidy for domestic producers can have the same protectionist effect as a $100 tariff imposed on foreign competitors. Well, I spoke with Robson late this week, who explains that the findings from the Productivity Commission's 50th annual Trade and Assistance Review. That's where this information comes from.
50 years and going strong, and we're looking forward to another 50 years of the Trade and Assistance Review, which basically is a transparency exercise around industry assistance in Australia and the extent to which trade policy is changing both in Australia and around the world.
OK, so we should try and break this down for people to try and give the importance to them. The Productivity Commission has always said that Australians should be able to buy the cheapest goods that they possibly can, no matter where they come from. And so this is about trying to break down trade barriers so that we have access to imported goods, but on top of that, to create barriers or take barriers away so that local companies can also be competitive.
That's right, Ross. So what we've seen over the last couple of decades, both in Australia and around the world, is that tariffs and quotas, those sort of at the border trade protectionist measures, have come down quite a bit, and the government's announced 457 nuisance tariffs coming off this year, which is a great announcement. But what's been happening both in Australia and around the world is that those have been gradually replaced by behind the border industry assistance measures that take the form of hidden subsidies, and they can be in principle just as protectionist as the tariffs and quotas that they're replacing.
You could almost argue that this started with the Donald Trump policy of Make America Great Again, to try and bring more manufacturing onshore to the United States, chip making, a whole range of other things, but then was taken even further by the Biden administration and its Inflation Reduction Act, which is massive and, of course, means that capital is now flowing to the United States seeking that assistance.
Well, that's right, Ross. And over the last year, the IMF, and we report this in the Trade and Assistance Review, they've tracked these industry assistance policies just in the last year, and there were 2,500 of them around the world, and 70% of those turned out to be trade distorting. So this is the issue that Australia is grappling with. We've got these legitimate policy challenges around national security, vulnerable supply chains, and the transition to net zero. We've got other countries engaging in this industry policy and selective and discriminatory intervention in their own countries. And the question really for Australia is, how do we respond to that in a way that is not too protectionist? Because we rely on open markets and free trade for our prosperity.
OK, so is the danger, though, if we do not respond at all, that we simply lose business to those countries that have very heavy subsidies? You know, capital is mobile. We often talk about this here. So if, say, for example, an energy company, a brick maker, decides to base themselves in the United States because they get greater government subsidy along with a whole bunch of other stuff, that makes commercial sense as compared with staying in Australia, where maybe those barriers are not as great or something like that.
That could be a risk, Ross. On the other side, there is the risk that you could simply distort things even further. And so what we've said in this report and in other places, and we'll have more to say about it in the future, is that what you need to do with these kinds of policies is keep them transparent. So that's what the Trade and Assistance Review does. It's a transparency exercise. Subject them to good cost-benefit analysis that's publicly available, and that would pick up some of the issues that you're talking about, those risks on the other side, and also have our exit ramps. So if it turns out that things don't go the right way with a particular industry policy, you keep an eye on the taxpayers' dollar amount that's invested in these things, and if it turns out they're not achieving their objectives, you've got a way out of them that's not too expensive for taxpayers to fund.
OK, so the Future Made in Australia policy that the government has come up with, $22.7 billion over the next 10 years, that is highlighting certain industries. Critical minerals is one, hydrogen is another, where the government decides that it wants Australia to be leaders in those areas. Now, you argue that the government should be a little agnostic about this. The government says, no, we're going to go head along and try and support those industries. What's the danger of that approach?
So we haven't evaluated those particular policies in this report, but what we do highlight is that the idea of comparative advantage, so Australia being a relatively low-cost producer in various industries, that is a very difficult thing to actually work out from the data, and that's even looking backwards. And so if you're trying to project that forwards, well, where are the industries where we're going to be competitive in the future? It's not that easy to project or even manufacture that sort of comparative advantage. And so that's the risk that we're just pointing to here generically in these things, is that you always want to subject these kinds of policies to good cost-benefit analysis, keep them transparent, and also have an exit ramp if you need to.
And there's another question which comes with that, and that is, should the government actually be making that analysis itself, or should it be left to industry to make that analysis? In other words, why does a taxpayer's dollar go into those areas, those key areas, when it could well be actually that private enterprise should be funding those things?
Well, a good cost-benefit analysis would tell you a lot about that. And so that's why we welcome the government's national interest framework. We think that there's potential improvements to that could be made, and we'll have more to say about that later. But what you need is both industry doing that work, but also if the government's going to decide to intervene to put taxpayer dollars at risk, that analysis should be done. And this has been an issue in Australia for a long time, Ross, that many of these policies, both under governments of all political persuasions, they're not subject to good cost-benefit analysis, and we think that should be part of this particular set of policies.
And I'll tell you one example of government intervention that came that in hindsight was probably a very good investment, though at the time was seriously questioned, and that's the National Broadband Network. So the NBN, when it was rolled out, was highly criticised by many as being not what the government should be doing. But if you think about the COVID years, the NBN certainly saved Australia's economy and probably saved a lot of businesses and jobs along the way.
Yeah, well, the NBN is a good case study in the need for a good upfront cost-benefit analysis that would look at different scenarios, do that sensitivity analysis and tell you something about the amount that's being spent and where it should be spent to be most effective. On the other hand, on the other side of the coin, Ross, you've got things like the intervention that went into the Australian domestic car manufacturing industry for many years, billions and billions of dollars. And it turned out that that was not such a great investment in the end.
So just one thing, because you did say that these types of interventionist measures could potentially affect the standard of living of Australians into the future. Just explain exactly what you meant by that, and how could a person's standard of living be affected?
So there's two things that could happen, Ross. Either the programs don't turn out to achieve the objectives that they were intended to do, and we're not making a judgment on that. We're just saying that is a possibility. And the second thing that could happen is that to the extent that they're regarded by other countries as protectionist measures, other countries could retaliate. And so that is happening around the world with the major economies. And Australia, as we're reliant on free and open markets around the world. We wouldn't want to get into a situation where we were intervening in certain industries and that was regarded as protectionism by other countries. And that's another way in which our standard of living could ultimately be negatively affected by these policies. On the other hand, they could turn out to be very good policies and they could improve Australia's standard of living. But the point is you want to do all of that thinking before you commit these dollars.
Which is precisely what the Trade and Assistance Review does, been going for 50 years. And Alex Robson, Deputy Chair of the Productivity Commission, many thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Ross. Good to be with you.